This album is, in my opinion, just about as perfect as it can get. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am Molly, and in this video I'm going to be ranking all of Radiohead's albums. Now I realize that this is a very contentious subject. Radiohead is a band that honestly cannot really make a bad album, or at least they haven't yet in my opinion. So this is going to be a very difficult ranking. It's also probably going to be one that a lot of people might disagree with. But obviously this is totally my opinion. This is a completely subjective ranking. And yeah, let's get started with the ranking. Alright, so before I start ranking all of the albums, I'll just quickly run through my ranking system here. So A+ is absolute perfection. I cannot fault this album for anything. A is going to be very close to perfection, so there might be like one or two tiny little things I have an issue with, but overall, fantastic. B is just solid, so not my favorite, but really, really good. Still really enjoy listening to it. C is really good, but just kind of forgettable for me personally. And then the bottom category, D, is just by no means a bad album, obviously. I enjoy all of Radiohead's stuff, to be honest, but they're just not favorites of mine. So I'm going to go in order of when each album came out. So their first album was Pablo Honey, released in 1993. And I will be honest and say I think this is my least favorite Radiohead album. The first two tracks, You and Creep, are so good, and then the rest of the album for me is kind of forgettable. I don't ever really find myself listening to it, to be honest. Yeah, so believe it or not, I think I will be putting Pablo Honey in D. Yeah. Radiohead's not off to a great start, but it will get better, I promise. Next up we have their album The Bends. Now this album is kind of difficult for me to rank because I feel like it works pretty well as an album to listen through. However, there's not really any songs off of this album that I personally am compelled to listen to. I've listened to this album beginning to end a couple of times, and I think overall as an album, I enjoy it. It's just kind of forgettable though, like it kind of just fades into the background for me. So I think for that reason, I'm gonna put The Bends in C. I think I will be putting it there. If you said to me between The Bends and Pablo Honey, if I had to pick one to listen to as an album, I'd definitely rather listen to The Bends, but it's just not a super memorable one for me. So yeah, I think The Bends will be going in C, for me personally. Next up is perhaps the most iconic Radiohead album, their 1997 album, OK Computer. But OK Computer, it's well known for a good reason. This is a really, really well crafted, interesting, cohesive album that blends a lot of traditional rock sounds with very, very interesting, new, kind of avant-garde, electronic, computery sounds. But I really enjoy this album. It definitely works extremely well. I think probably my favorite two tracks from this album are Climbing Up the Walls and Lucky. In fact, I think if I had to critique this album for anything, I kind of wish it ended with Lucky. That song is so good, and I think as the last track on OK Computer, it just would be perfection. But yeah, Lucky is a great song. This album is great. I think I'm still gonna put it in A. It's so close to A+, but I think for me, I'm just gonna put it in A. It's like, it's just missing a tiny little thing. But fantastic album though. I do really, really like this one. Definitely one of their best albums for sure. Next up is Radiohead's album Kid A. This one is kind of like The Bends for me. It's really good to listen to as an album, but specific tracks on it I don't really find myself going back to listen to very often. Kid A is a fantastic album to just put on almost as background music if you want to, I don't know, like work on something, or even just to fall asleep to in a good way, not in a bad way, but even just to turn on to lull yourself to sleep. Kid A is a really good album, but for me it's kind of forgettable. Again, it's just one of those albums that kind of fades into the background in terms of Radiohead's discography. So I think for me, Kid A is on par with The Bends for that reason. It's a good album, it's just not one I really am drawn to that often. I think I would put Kid A above The Bends though, but I would still put it in C. It's not bad, it's just not my favorite album from Radiohead, so I think I'll be putting it in C. Next up is their album Amnesiac. And this one kind of surprised me, to be honest. I went into listening to this album not really expecting a ton. It's not really a Radiohead album I ever hear things about, but it's surprisingly pretty good. I enjoyed Amnesiac a lot. I think Pyramid Song is probably my favorite track on this album. That song is really good. And Pull Revolving Doors is a really interesting one too. But for sure an album filled with a lot of unique sounds, and it's an interesting album in Radiohead's discography, and it's surprisingly really good considering that you don't really hear a lot about it. But I think for me Amnesiac would be in B. I don't think it's quite an A. It could. I think it has potential to be an A if I listen to it more and it grows on me. For now, I would be putting it in B though. So now things are kind of getting down to the nitty-gritty. We have 4 albums left, and the next one up is going to be Radiohead's 2003 album Hail to the Thief. Now this album, in my opinion, is so good. I absolutely love it. And it's one of Radiohead's albums that, for some reason, I feel like a lot of people don't like as much. But it is one of my favorites. It's so good. I think what it is for me, it just has almost a little more energy to it than their previous albums, which I enjoy. A good example of this is Myxomatosis. That song is so good, but it's more energetic, amplified than some of their previous work. And I just really enjoy that sound that Radiohead kind of went toward on Hail to the Thief. But aside from Myxomatosis, the opening track, 2 + 2 = 5, is really, really good. And then definitely by far my favorite track on Hail to the Thief, and possibly my favorite Radiohead track of all time, is probably Where I End and You Begin. That song is so good. In conclusion, Hail to the Thief is a fantastic album, and for me it's an A+. I just think, I love it. It's a great album. So next up we have Radiohead's album In Rainbows. I know this is a popular album amongst critics and fans alike, and for good reason. It is a very, very well-crafted album. It flows so seamlessly well, beginning to end. Very enjoyable listen. What really works about In Rainbows, in my opinion, is it's somehow a very concise album. It doesn't have an incredibly long running time, but yet it has everything in it that needs to be there. Is it my favorite Radiohead album? No. But it's very, very good. All I Need is a great track, and Reckoner is probably my favorite track on this album. Reckoner is fantastic. And then Videotape as the ending track is beautiful. It just works fantastically well. So overall, In Rainbows, I think, is a very well thought out, crafted album. It's not my personal favorite Radiohead album. It's just missing something for me. I'm like this close to putting it in A+. I think I'm gonna put it in A though. I think I'd put In Rainbows in A, like just a hair below OK Computer. But OK Computer and In Rainbows for me they're very close. I think as an album I enjoy listening to OK Computer just a tad bit more. So I'm gonna leave it like that for now. Alright, next up we have The King of Limbs. This album, for some reason it has a very special place in my heart. I don't know why. It's so good. It's very short. And I understand why a lot of Radiohead fans and critics didn't necessarily love this album. I understand the reasoning, but I still love it. I just really enjoy listening to this album. It's super atmospheric. There's some really underrated Radiohead songs on this album. I think Morning Mr. Magpie is really good. And then Feral, it's exactly that. It's uninhibited, kind of a wild sounding track, yet still atmospheric. I feel like Radiohead was just trying out a bunch of different cool atmospheric sounds on The King of Limbs. And yeah, there are a few shortfalls, but overall this is a good album. I really, really like listening to it. I think for me, I would put it in A. I would put it below OK Computer and In Rainbows, but definitely an A for me. I think The King of Limbs is really underrated in the Radiohead world. There's just a lot of interesting sounds on there and some really good songs. So yeah, it gets an A for me. Last but not least, we have Radiohead's 2016 album, A Moon-Shaped Pool. Now, in my humble opinion, this is Radiohead's best album. This album is, in my opinion, just about as perfect as it can get. It's like the perfect running time, The songs flow together so well. This is one of those albums you just have to put on a good pair of headphones, lay in bed in a dark room at night, and just listen to this album beginning to end. It's so good. It's just so good. I have really nothing bad to say about this album at all. But yeah, this album is just an experience. Just the flow between songs, it's a little bit melancholic, but it's also relaxing at the same time. You have orchestral moments infused with a little bit of rock, and it just blends together so seamlessly. The first 3 tracks right off the bat, Burn the Witch, Daydreaming, and Deck's Dark, are probably my 3 favorite tracks. I think Deck's Dark might be my favorite. That song is so good. I also really like Full Stop. Identikit is really good. Yeah, just overall this is a solid album. More than solid. It's, in my opinion, fantastic. So for me, I would put that right at the top of A+. Just such a great album. Alright, so there you have it. That is my completed ranking of all of Radiohead's albums to date. So in A+ perfection category, we have A Moon-Shaped Pool and Hail to the Thief. And then in A, which is so close to perfect, just maybe missing 1 or 2 things, we have OK Computer, In Rainbows, and The King of Limbs. And then for B, so solid album, maybe there's just a couple of issues, but overall good, we have Amnesiac. For C, which are albums that kind of just fade into the background, not super memorable, we have Kid A and The Bends. And then in the D category, which are albums I don't really ever find myself listening to, just not favorites of mine, we just have Pablo Honey, their first album, which is really interesting. But overall, Radiohead just has a great discography. All of these albums are really good. I just want to clarify that. So yeah, I'm going to conclude this video here. I hope you all enjoyed watching my little ranking of all of Radiohead's albums. But let me know down in the comments if you agree with me, disagree with me. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned for more stuff coming soon to my channel, and I will see you all next time.